Well, we seem to have lost them just there at that very moment, but I'm just standing by. I'm seeing them, but I'm not hearing them. In fact, I think I might have just lost them momentarily.
A very pleasant good evening to you, Ruskin, and to our beautiful and fantastic loyal listenership at Talk 91.1 FM. Of course, we are Indaba, the voice of the people, the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee, the place where knowledge grows, and certainly the place to find consensus. Well, we are overjoyed on tonight. Before I reintroduce this host that has been MIA for a little bit, of course, for very good reason, and he'll talk about that on tonight. We do want to remind you that we are live also on Facebook and we are live on YouTube. So at any point in time at the end of the program, by way of Talk City 91.1 FM, you want to join us on, as it were, Indaba Overtime, you can hop on over to the Emancipation Support Committee page, the CPAN page, or our Emancipation Support Committee YouTube channel. With that said, this is, of course, Wednesday, the 21st of February, 2024, and I'm joined in studio by two very distinguished gentlemen. The gentleman to my left, Baba, Dr. Claudius Fergus, extraordinary in terms of his historic scholarship. Looking forward to your book soon and very soon. And you've been putting in a lot of time and effort with regards to same. I call you the people's scholar because of your availability. To my right, we have our brother, the esteemed activist, the people's champion himself, Crossroad Freedom Project founder, no less a person than Shabaka Kambon. And tonight we have a jam-packed program for you. We'll be discussing, of course, the Norse anniversary. Today is the Norse anniversary. They are celebrating a great number of years. I think it's 50 years on tonight, and we'll get into that with one of the Norse founding members, I do believe, in Martin Alexander. That'll be followed, of course, by our Africa report on tonight. And last but not least, we'll go into tonight's viewpoint, which is going to be dealing with the issue of internal reparations. That being said, please do us a favor by way of the social media, like this, of course, live broadcast. Do comment, let us know where you're from, and do share the live as well. Without further ado, I kick it over to my brother, whom I have not seen in a little while, but certainly very glad to see him on tonight. Very pleasant good night to you, Shabak.
Greetings, brother Kamau, and it is indeed a pleasure for me to be able to rejoin you, gentlemen, yourself, and Dr. Fergus on this important program in the Talk Sphere in Trinidad and Tobago on 91.1 Talk City, and of course to beaming to our brothers and sisters across the world on the internet. I missed you guys, of course. And in the interim, I've been working. I'm going to issue an article to the newspapers tomorrow on the hair issue in Trinidad and Tobago, an issue I don't think is resolved, and it pains me to see more children and their parents coming to newspapers, going to the ministry, trying to sort out and solve the problem around Afro-textured hair. It seems to still be, despite the new hair code, which was launched in September 2023 last year, we're still having those incidents, and reports are coming into the Caribbean Freedom Project, Emancipation Support Committee, and I felt it was time for us to do the conversation. We've had this conversation right here on Indaba, but it was time for us to pen the analysis and place it in front of the respective authorities to do what is necessary to improve the situation. So that's going to be launched tomorrow. We'll see. Should be published in the next few days.
Yes, good evening, everyone. And as I would like to reiterate, it's great to see our brother back in action. But I would like to say that we owe a debt of gratitude to Dr. Asher Kambon for holding the fort and for focus,
Absolutely.
that focus that we all shared on the Palestinian question, and which she pioneered over, I think, a three edition series of Indaba. Thank you very much, Dr. Asher Kambon, for your
Indeed,
services. I
indeed.
know you're always ready. And Black Power, of course, is another area that you may very well want to participate in. Shabaka, since you raised it, I didn't get back on to you the second revised edition of the draft. But you know, we are all with you. It was excellently written, and perhaps I had nothing to say except to tell you, you know, proceed, my brother. It's well
Thank,
done.
thank
Great
you.
piece of work. Great piece of work. I hope the newspaper handle it, because I know they have a problem with lengthy pieces unless you get, you know, a column, the guest column. And sometimes you may have to do that, try to get in as a guest columnist in order to get opportunity to express, you know, in greater length, you know. So that's
Yeah.
something you should do.
I hope that the editors will see the importance of the piece, especially in light of the fact that you just had the expose on the report published in the British Research Journal around the increase in skin lightening or skin whitening in Trinidad and Tobago. I think that the two things really, are connected, and I think that it is imperative that we begin to look at these issues, which at the surface level don't seem so important. People say, why bother? We have rules for a reason. They say these kinds of things. They don't really understand the depth of the issue and the way that it impacts the development of the African child. And so I wrote the piece very carefully with the hope that the editor would see the importance of it.
You know, these editors hold certain interests as well, and certain ideologies and philosophies. So our interest may not necessarily be a shared interest that they have. So that's why I'm saying. But in addition, Shabaka, perhaps you should, something like this, and issues like this should not be relegated just to the newspapers. Perhaps you should find a way. Well, I know the platform is there, social media platform, but I think it should be across a lot of social media space as well, you know, because it's a great piece, it's an ongoing issue. I don't think it would die with this particular intervention. And so that kind of message that is there and the way that you articulated it, I think it should have a greater audience in terms of media.
Thank you,
So,
Dr. Fergus.
yeah,
Thank you
if you
very much.
consider that, yeah. Yeah, so let's move on. Let's get on with the topic.
Well, tonight, let me say that I'm happy to be back on a night when we celebrate a person, and I want to say celebrate this person because all the people who are from that Black Power generation, and I'm using the word now in the broadest possible sense. That is that generation, generally born in the 1940s, who wanted more from independence and who were prepared to sacrifice, with some even making the ultimate sacrifice, to move the countries of the Caribbean forward, not just Trinidad and Tobago, but right across the Caribbean. And so there are those figures who are at the center of the movements in different parts of the
Absolutely.
Caribbean. My father, perhaps being one of them, along with Brother McCandle, Daga, and others. And then there are those figures who are not so much at the center of a political movement. Some of them aren't even involved in politics. Some of them are artists. Some of them are writers. Some of them are intellectuals in different fields. But there's a broad cross section of our people who challenged the system around that time and who, as I said, made sacrifices to try to get more from independence than it was designed to give. and we want to celebrate them all. And we have one of them with us tonight, a very special one, a leader of NORS. That's Brother Martin Alexander. And good night, brother. Welcome to Indaba. I want you to tell our audience what NORS is and where NORS fits into this Black Power movement. This Black Power generation. Beyond the Black Power
Good night
movement,
to you,
I'm
brother.
talking now Black Power generation. Good night, brother.
Yes. National Organization of Revolutionary Students. For those who don't know what the NORS acronym means, the National Organization of Revolutionary Students, which came in the wake of the earlier Black Power marches in 1970.
Oh, yes. Good night to the panel and to our listening audience.
Right.
The National Organization of Revolutionary Students. That's what is the name of NORS. That's right. And this was composed of the students. Yeah.
Yes, so
there seems to be a little challenge with your audio. We will be able to go right ahead.
Yes.
Limited.
Yes. Now, this was composed of students from the secondary schools throughout Trinidad and Tobago. And of course, like everyone else in Trinidad, we were all aware of what was taking place in the country with the whole of the Black Power movement. In fact, we were all aware of what was.
Oh man, we lost Brother Alexander. In prep for tonight's program, we hope we'll have him back shortly. I went to interview some of the young people from his generation who were at school, who didn't have that courage to leave their classrooms and to join in the protests at the national level with himself and people like Josanne Lennon and others, just to get an impression of what they thought of these students. And so I went around talking to some of the other people from St. Joseph Convent and St. Mary's and bishops and so on at the time who didn't feel that they could join the movement at the time to hear and one of the things that comes across is the sense that they admired them for their courage. They were impressed by the courage of these students to take that public stand. I mean, the other thing is that they thought they were crazy. Some students said it was, how could they take such a stand, at that time? And what you find in most students now, or most ex-students, former students, is the sense that history has proved that these students were right. They were justified in their actions at the time. So even though many students didn't understand what was taking place at the time, they didn't feel, even those who sympathized didn't feel that they themselves had the courage to participate in the movement at that level. I think the vast majority now look back in hindsight and see that these young people who formed the student movement at the time, and it's difficult when you look back in history, because you think of the Black Power revolutionaries as students themselves, but there would have been a youth arm of that movement, of that revolution, called NORS. And those students who were still in school uniform in secondary school, those students would have been the ones that, would have taken to the streets on their own and so on, and pioneered their own agenda and so on at that time.
But Shabaka, having spoken with these students, did they tell you whether in the immediate aftermath or during these protests or after they had left school, soon after graduation, whether those activities, that commitment and the revolutionary spirit of those that they could not join, whether that impacted their lives at all in any way.
I did not ask that question, but what I did find interesting was that those students who went abroad awakened to a sense of, to appreciate that the work of the students to a large extent. So those who would have gone to study in the United States of America or the United Kingdom or Canada even would have gained a sense of perspective from traveling and seeing the Caribbean from the outside. Those who stayed would have been more likely to remain cloistered and less likely to find a sense of solidarity until much later with the students.
Could we get some names of some of these revolutionaries so that we can etch them, in the archival memory of people who are listening to the program? We have people like Joseph Leonard. I think we had people like Che. You would know a lot more of the names than myself.
Chika Mose would have been another one of them who's still alive and so on, and who would have been part of the foundation of the Emancipation Support Committee. He would have continued his work. He would have run for office at some point in the National Joint Action Committee. He would have been sort of the, he would have been that Chinese member of the of NJAC. NJAC embraced, a broad cross section of people within its ranks, and Uncle Chi was certainly one of those revolutionaries. He represented that community by his very presence in the National Joint Action Committee. But we have Brother Alexander back with us, who could call some more of the names of those who were involved with him, who took to the streets with him. That sister from Bishop's Amnesty, who was very central. Brother, call some names for us.
Let us honor these heroes, and I am particularly curious about that Tobago aspect of it, because I'm not aware. So you mentioned Trinidad and Tobago students, so perhaps that would be some new information for our listening audience. Some of these people from Tobago. If you don't remember the names, tell us the schools that were involved. Go ahead, Abu. Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Yes, you would have had in Trinidad, of course. At that time, she would have been known as Lynette Patrick at that time. You would have also had Kirkland Paul, now deceased, from Belmont Intermediate, Dennis Francis, Terence Reggie from Southeast Port of Spain. In Woodbrook Secondary, you would have had, who is now deceased, Michael Wint and Debbie Kilgore.
Debbie.
From Woodbrook Secondary, of course, Bowring, Leslie Bowring from Woodbrook Secondary, still alive. You would have had from Wong's, Wayne King, and there are many persons where we're talking now about over 51 years ago. So that at a moment's notice, I'm testing my memory. However, in Tobago, you also had over there Brother Mbao Mohini, who is the younger brother of deceased Brother Tukuini, who actually worked, though he was over the age, but he was actively involved with the students of NORS when we operated out of Bellsmith Street by Brother Gaddafi. And of course, the other person who worked alongside with him and us at that time, Shabaka, would have been Sister Asha Kambon. So these are the persons who were in the forefront, because what happened is that the leadership of NJAC was locked up in political detention, and it was the students who were able to continue to carry the whole momentum of the movement to the people. So that today we have many of our younger ones having at least African first names. And it is that during that period where North would be holding many of those rallies at number 1 Bellsmite Street. And of course, sensitizing the masses. So besides political, but also their Black culture. Of course, there was a lot of emphasis on the reorganizing of the education system. So that today, some of the things that came out of that are things like school panorama. Because before that, pan was a no-no in school. Things like African and Indian culture, that schools and school calypso and so forth, all of that came out of the agitation of NOS. And also the changing of the curriculum, because Eric Williams was forced to hold a consultation at the Shagarama Convention Center with the students. Of course, those of us in the leadership could not go because he would not entertain hearing from us. But what we did is that we sent all of our ideas with our members from St. Mary's, QRC, Holy Name, bishops, and the other convents. And of course, he was very receptive of what they had to say. Of course, what he didn't know is that it came from the leadership of NOS. And of course, you had the changing of the education so that the Caribbean Examinations Council is a product of the work of NOS, because before that, England, and corrected by undergraduates in England. And there were many instances where you had people's papers turning up on the subways of the trains in England, because these undergraduates were not very particular with people's exam scores. And of course, you're talking about GCE, which has a direct bearing on your future. So out of that, out of our agitation, came the Caribbean Examinations Council, which has been able to make the curriculum a bit more suited to the needs of the Caribbean, not just Trinidad, but to the Caribbean child. So these are some of the achievements that NOS was able to bring into the system.
I find it fascinating when you talk about the exclusion or the way that the PNM at that time was willing to include, children who would have gone to the schools where they saw as the catchment areas for the upper middle class, and at the same time be unwilling to seem to engage the voices of those from the schools that would have been catchment area for the rest of the society. I find that to be, fascinating. That seems to continue to be a trend within the way that the party constructs the legitimate voices, the way it sees what is legitimate to be included in the political sphere up to today, one could argue.
Well, I would inject here something that still exists to this day. That is, the school where everything came to a head was the school that I attended, which is Woodbrook Secondary. And other students came to lend support. Students from, and at that particular support meeting, 4 persons were arrested by the Woodbrook police. They were Boucher, Anthony Boucher, and Kirkland Paul.
I
And
couldn't miss the first name, but I got a
it
little bit of
was
it. I know it was
spoken
Josanne. So
about.
just confirm that. Just confirm that it was Josanne Leonard as well. We
Yeah,
didn't get the first name you called, but I'm thinking that the full
Josanne
name.
Leonard, yes.
Right.
Kirkland Paul, who is now deceased. Kirkland Paul. There was Anthony Boucher, and so you had Josanne, Kirkland, Boucher, and the other one slips me right now. But they were arrested by the Woodbrook police. And at that time, Josanne was 13 years old, and of course, very diminutive in size. And those children were subjected to torture at the Woodbrook police station. They were.
Yeah.
So that's the heavy hand of the state was there on the students. All of the students of Woodbrook Secondary were expelled. And it was the work of Mr. Bowring Sr., who was a labor activist and attorney, and Lennox Pear, who challenged the ministry that they would take them to court because what they were doing was illegal. And it is so the whole of the fifth form was able to write their GCE exams.
Yes, and again, I want us, Dr. Fergus, for a minute to
that happened at Woodbrook Secondary.
Yeah, it's broader. I want us to just put that event into the broader context of what was happening to the entire Black Power generation across the Caribbean at that moment. You know, we're talking about a period where Kwame Ture was banned from coming to Trinidad and Tobago. And Dr. Williams insisted that he was banned from even entering the airport. He wasn't supposed to be transshipped through the airport at Piarco. That was how serious the ban was on Kwame Ture. Walter Rodney was banned from the university in Jamaica, and he was refused to the ability to re-enter that country because of his connection to this movement. You know, we're talking about that first group of Caribbean leaders being paranoid about the contest to their politics from within the ranks of their own people, and seeing that contest even coming from students at secondary school as enough of a challenge to be suppressed in such a manner. I think that's really, really important. Some of the great intellectuals and so on. And so I don't want us to underestimate the courage of these students standing up at that time when the powers that be were so hostile. But I also want to give an interesting piece of insight while Mr. Alexander is not here. So my father and I had this, fascinating opportunity to speak to one of the founders of the PNM. To have lunch with him. I wouldn't call his or her name. I don't want to sell out. I don't want to give any clues. About how the party perceived the revolution. And it's fascinating lunch that we had. The gentleman or gentle lady said that, they saw themselves as representing Black power. PNM, they were Black. They were empowering Black people. And therefore, what was the need for a Black Power revolution? They saw it as an absolute nuisance and unnecessary. They did not see it. They could not understand it. You know, what we were, where we were black, we were empowering black people, we were black people in power. And therefore, what was the need for a black power revolution? It was redundant and, and silly, and this is how they saw it from the inside. So it's interesting as we get older, we get a chance to talk to all the different parties involved and get some insights into how they saw it. But what we do know is that across the board, across the Caribbean, there was a sense of paranoia that the ideology or the movement represented by Noahs here in this case, and other groups and intellectuals and individuals represented a real threat to the ruling class, that new quote unquote black ruling class at the turn of independence. And
Yeah, I want to extend what you say, the first point that you made, Shabaka. Beyond the Caribbean, the Black Power youth movement extended as far as New Zealand. There were people there who were incorporating that radical aspect of Black Power through the Black Panther framework. And of course, in South Africa, you had Steve Biko, who was leading the student movement there, and there were masses of students in a much more volatile political environment, much more hostile. And of course, we know he paid the ultimate price for it. So we need to recognize Steve Biko as well as part of this global movement and call for justice, a call for change against the most hostile regimes that perhaps ever existed at that point in time, the apartheid regime of South Africa, and we need to call names. I think people would need to understand why we call names, The African have a saying, when you call a man's name, you make him live again, the ancient Egyptians, the people of Kemet. And the final thing I want to note, just as a sort of addendum, with respect to Williams. Now, Williams actually wrote, Williams and the party, right? So you said they were representative of Black Power. Interestingly, Williams wrote a manuscript that remains unpublished. It's at the UE, the West Indian section of the library. It is called the Black Power Revolution. I saw the manuscript, but I have not read it. I have intended to, but I have not done it. It would be interesting perhaps to have that published, whatever it says, so that you get inside the mind of the man at the time that the revolution was ongoing, because this was not history looking way back. This was contemporary history that he was writing, and not only history, but perhaps, commentaries, but perhaps biographical as well, So that is an important work, although I have not read it, but I'm sure it's an important work. It is a historical piece, and perhaps one day it should be published by someone who would take that responsibility
Absolutely.
to edit it.
I agree. I agree. One point I want to make here, gentlemen, before we go into the Africa report, and it's borrowing from what Baba Fergus said, and it has to do with this international movement of youth revolutionaries. We see that in even our contemporary times, holding a lot of powerful sway among millennials and Gen Zs as it relates to this whole Israel Palestine issue. A number of the persons coming to the fore, a number of persons making tremendous sacrifices in the various universities across the United States of America and even in Europe and elsewhere are indeed persons of that Gen Z slash millennial generation, and many of them are within again collegiate years, university years, making a tremendous sacrifice. You talked about Stokely Carmichael. Of course, he was the fourth chairman of SNCC, the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. And as a result of that, they would have been responsible for those freedom rides in 1961 under Dia Nash et al. And they showed up in some really, really powerful ways. So it just goes to show that in each era, in each revolutionary struggle that we've had as a people, whether it's the Dalit Black Panther Party in India, or whether it is the Black Panther Party in the US, or whether it is Norse here in Trinidad and Tobago, or SNCC in the USA, or Steve Biko et al. In South Africa, the youth have shown up in some really radical and powerful ways. But as I land, there seems to be a shift. We can't answer it now because we have to go into the Africa report, but there seems to be a shift. And there doesn't seem to be that kind of in Trinidad and by extension Tobago, and then by extension the Caribbean. There isn't this kind of revolutionary fervor that used to be, at least in my opinion and in my observation. So the question would be, one, is that observation correct? That fervor isn't there as it used to be, and then two, what gives rise to that, and then number three, how can we deal with that? How can we address that? How can we get some of the very comfortable youth within our universities and schools to see their role in shaping and changing society as a serious one and stand up for something? We seem to be losing that. I want to land there, and I want to kick it over to you, Baba Fergus, so you can lead us into your Africa report.
Yes, indeed, indeed. And that's a theme that will have some continuity in the discussion that follows. It is an imperialist, colonialist theme, but it also reflects in the reparations movement of today. Because as we speak, part of the return of artifacts stolen during the period that I am addressing in the Africa report, the 1870s, have been returned to the owners, the rightful owners, the Ashanti people of Ghana. So it's part of the restitution aspect of reparations, which, of course, as we know, for Africans, that's the major focus of reparations, restitution of artifacts, material artifacts, treasures, and so on, but also human body parts and a number of other things. A lot of the wealth of the continent was looted. I believe it was philosophical, ideological, in order to deprive Africa of as much evidence as possible that they were in fact a great civilization. And so by pauperizing the continent of those pieces of evidence, you can more easily prove the falsehood, that Africa was a place of no history. As so many of those racist those scientific racist historians would have propagated at that same time. That they were looting in the second half of the 19th century. That was the same time that this new ideology of history emerged. The history that says that the African race, you must know these people produce nothing because of their race. Or you must know that it was these other people who did it because of their race. So that all achievements of Africa were the achievements of other people. And we know the details of that. So, Rene, without further ado, bring up the video for me, and let's move into the Africa report. The narrative that the scramble for Africa began with the Berlin Conference of 1884-1885 is not true. The scramble started in the 1870s into the early 1880s with British militarism in West Africa, Southern Africa, Egypt, and Ethiopia. Their main European competitor was the French. In West Africa, the French invaded the Mandinka Empire of Samori Touré. But the most significant event was the earlier British invasion and defeat of the Asante Empire, the strongest military power in West Africa at the time. The Berlin Conference simply brought more European players and set rules for partitioning the continent. This week's Africa Report highlights the invasion of Asante, with a focus on the Sagrenti War of 1874. This month, Ghana commemorates the 150th anniversary of that war, notably in the city of Kumasi, the Ashanti capital. Sagrenti is not Akan, the language of the Ashanti, nor is it English. Let me introduce Ghana's eminent lawyer historian, Yao Anoche Frimpong, to explain.
Sagrenti is the name, in fact, a corrupted form of the name Sir Garnet Wolseley, to be able to mention or call the full name of the man who led the British Army against the Ashantis in 1874 would be a mouthful. So the corrupted version, Sagrenti.
Garnet Wolseley was also the governor of Sierra Leone and the Gambia, with oversight in the southern Gold Coast, northern Nigeria, and Lagos. The cause of the Sagrenti War could be traced back to the First Asante-British War of 1824, but the immediate cause, the causa bellum, was the Dutch sale of Elmina Castle to the British in 1870, which triggered an Asante occupation of the castle and the stationing of Asante troops in the town of Elmina. For years, the Asante had exercised sovereignty over Elmina and considered the Dutch to be their tenant, trading partner, and ally. The British also gave as the cause of war the refusal of Asante to abide by the Treaty of 1831, which included giving up sovereignty over the southern states. In 1873, Wolseley's ships bombarded Elmina Castle and the town, killing many Asante soldiers. Time does not allow for details of the course of the war. I call it Africa's First World War because of the multi-ethnic composition of the opposing armies. At the time of the war, the Ashanti Empire was about 3 times the size shown on historical maps. The boundaries of the empire included the Musi in the Savannah Zone in the north, ethnic groups in Côte d'Ivoire, Fantiland, Accra, the Ewe of Togo, and the Edo of Benin in Nigeria. Asante's allies included many ethnic groups within these regions. The British had 600 troops stationed at Cape Coast. In preparation for the war, and as the war progressed, they brought in 2,000 elite troops from England, additional troops from Jamaica, Sierra Leone, the Gambia, Hausaland, and Lagos. They also had the backing of the Dutch. Altogether, the British invasion force comprised 40,000 soldiers, which matched the size of the Asante's main army. Interestingly, the Fante refused to join the British, either in fear of or respect for the Asante. During 1873, Asante armies won some stunning victories against British forces and their allies near Cape Coast, but eventually some 20,000 Asante soldiers were cut off from returning to Kumasi. Meanwhile, the British forces were hastening towards Kumasi. As Wolseley's forces approached, the citizens abandoned the city, led by Asantehene Kofi Karikari. On the 4th of February 1874, Wolseley entered and abandoned Kumasi. The British were shocked to see the huge size of the royal palace. Wolseley sent for Asantehene Karakari, who refused the invitation, knowing the risks of British treachery. In retaliation, Wolseley's soldiers privately looted some 400,000 ounces of gold dust, while the cultural treasures were looted in the name of Queen Victoria. The current worth of the gold dust alone is over £2 billion sterling. Wolseley then blew up the royal palace and burnt Kumasi to the ground. The British were also shocked to see the huge royal library with books in 7 languages. Like the Spaniards had done to the great Mayan library in the 16th century, the British also burnt the royal library and destroyed all the books of the Asantehene, which facilitated the false narrative of Africa as a place of darkness without history. The impact of Asante's defeat in 1874 was far-reaching. In some ways, it accelerated the scramble for the rest of the continent. At the major battle site of Amoafo, over 40 communities were erased from the map. The effects are still felt today as the people are still struggling to rebuild those communities. Let's hear Yao Frimpong on a psychological impact of the war. on Ghanaians today.
So this Sangranti War, which took place 150 years ago, why is it significant to us in the 21st century?
Extremely significant. It's a very lovely question. The first significance of this is the betrayal of Ashanti by the Dutch. You see, Elmina was Ashanti territory. Now the treaty to exchange the force took place in England, including Elmina, in disregard of Ashanti interests. So the first thing for us as Africans and black people to learn is that no matter the differences existing between white people, Europeans, they were more interested in their interest more than their positions, common interest, more than their positions. At any time, they were ready to sacrifice their positions and then stick to interests that will be of a higher benefit to them. So that was the first one. The second one was that, as we began by saying, the British themselves had decided to take the whole of the Gold Coast. And if you take the whole of the Gold Coast, the southern tribes were of no consequence for them. Always it was Ashanti. So they had already planned at the Westminster to come and destroy Ashanti. So it's of significance to us that at all times, these people are thinking not once, twice, and three times about us, how to plunder us, and then take whatever we have, irrespective of whatever friendship they have with us.
Will we ever learn? With the fall of Asante, the British turned on their African allies and imposed colonial status on them. First, the southern realm of the Ashanti Empire was reduced to a colony and named the Gold Coast. This was classic divide, conquer, and rule strategy. The rest of the empire rapidly balkanized into warring states, which sought independence from Asante. By the end of the century, the Asantehene and his family were taken into captivity and exiled in the Seychelles. After the disastrous final Asante-British War of 1900, the Ya-Asantewaa War, the Asante themselves became a colonized people. Since the 1920s, the Asante had been trying to regain possession of their cultural treasures. This 150th anniversary commemoration of the Sangranti War have inspired some success, but not without some humiliation to the Central Ghanaian government. The Fowler Museum of the University of California returned 7 items to the Asantehene at the Grand Durbar of Chiefs at the Manshire Palace last week. The Fowler Museum had received them from the British Wellcome Trust in 1964 as gifts, or we can say a sharing of the spoils. A second batch of 32 items from the British Museum and the Victoria and Albert Museum are due to arrive in Kumasi in April or May this year, but on loan. Among these items is the sacred Mpongpongso sword, a state sword, on which all Asantes swore the oath of office, and on which paramount chiefs swore allegiance to the Asantehene. Fortunately, the Asante people had successfully hidden the sacred golden stool from Wolseley, which remained hidden for all of the colonial period and re-emerged in the public only during the reign of Asantehene Prempeh II. The British did not know that the golden stool was actually made of solid gold until the 1890s. The Ya-Asantewaa War is also called the War for the Golden Stool. The golden stool is considered to contain the soul of the Asante people and remains the most significant symbol of their national unity.
Yes, so that's your Africa report for this week. The theme of decolonization, of course, is an ongoing enterprise. And that lesson that the professor spoke about, you know, the way he expressed it in terms of that collective and enduring white interest against anything else, including their own position on something, we see that playing out even now with respect to the position taken on Israel. We see that. That is the same thing. It's a continuing ideology that they have. And of course, you know, we had our own Tony Martin who understands that so well in his book, Race First. You know, a lot of people were saying, you know, that he was being reverse racist. But no, he understood the power of that collective in respect of white supremacy. You stick together no matter what. Your interest is paramount, and anything else is secondary, including the friendship that you have built with other people who are not of your own race. Over to you, my brothers.
Well, first of all, another Sterling Africa report. Somebody's asking a question, and I do want to recognize Dan Man in Jamaica, Sister Irene, Ambassador Emmanuel Sikanarti, also of Ghana. And he asked the question, what is your opinion in terms of the British giving, as it were, loans of looted artifacts, so to speak? So that's part one. And then the second question that he asked is with regards to the stool. He was inquiring as to whether or not it is the original stool, the original artifacts. Thankfully, in this case, Ambassador, the stool was not looted. It was one of the surviving artifacts that remained in our hands, so that was not lost. But with regards to the sword, among the other artifacts, yes, that is a good question. Is that the original? Are these perhaps replicas? Perhaps you may never know, outside of maybe some type of sangomao or something of that nature. But he did ask the question, what are your thoughts, Baba Fergus, in relation to the loan of looted artifacts?
Well, when you can replicate honey artificially, I would believe that they might be able to come up with some kind of otherwise, those are the authentic, original artifacts. And you're correct with respect to the golden stool. They didn't find it. Now, they doubted that you could have such a thing as a pure golden stool. First, they doubted. But long after the war, when they realized that it was indeed true, and that this was the center of the Ashanti unity, so that, in other words, they can always pull together back so long as they had ownership of the stool. And that's why they wanted the stool so badly. And Asantewa understood that and determined they would never put their hands on it. But by that time, it was already hidden. And a lot of the gold was also hidden. It's just a small amount of the gold they got, you know. A lot of the gold was also hidden, right? Now, with respect to a loan, I find it insulting, extremely insulting. And they have done it to other people as well. But the museums of Europe and America, the vast amount of looted items are from Africa. There's no doubt about that, throughout the continent. And to simply, after years, this is after a century of demand, as I said, since 1921, in the case of the Ashanti, they have been asking for the return of the artifacts. So after 100 years, you're now saying that we would lend it to you for a short period of time, and we're going to take it back because our laws say that we cannot, laws can be changed. Laws can be changed if they want to give it back. And I believe someday they would have to give them back. And it means that the laws would have to change. But the laws mainly protect those in the British Museum, mainly those in the British Museum, because there are other museums that have returned artifacts to the Benin artifacts were in other museums that they returned. But it is a British Museum that the law is directed to, that you cannot repatriate any of the stolen loot in that museum, right? It's insulting to me, and the president of Ghana has found it insulting. Up to now, as far as I know, he has refused to participate in the commemoration of the return of the artifacts. Okay? And he's an Ashanti man. He's an Ashanti man as well. But he's the head of government, and as far as the government is concerned, they're saying this is insulting and they cannot agree to it, and therefore they cannot celebrate the return with the Asante Hene. It's the Asante Hene and the Ashanti chiefs are celebrating the return, not the government directly. I'm not saying not members of the government individually, but not the government directly as represented in the presidency. Yes.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you so much for that, Baba Fergus. And with the 5 minutes that we have left on Talk City 91.1, we want to head into the viewpoint for tonight. And I have the privilege and pleasure of leading us into that area. So, Renee, if you can, by way of your technical assistance, if you can cue that up, that would be beautiful. Thank you so much. So tonight's viewpoint is addressing the issue of 12 keystones of Ubuntu, an African black print for internal reparations or self-repair. With regards to that process, we move on to the next slide. Poor policy and not overpopulation is humanity's fundamental challenge. This was the words paraphrase, of course, of Imperial Majesty Haile Selassie, May 17, 1966. And I'm quoting verbatim: if humanity is led to a better observance of covenants that are meant for orderly conduct of life, and if the progress of science is applied solely for human welfare, the increase of population would have not become a burden, or would have become not a burden, but a matter of gratification. Where am I going with this? Umuntu, ungumuntu, ungubantu. I am because you are is the golden rule. It is the founding piety model. It is the founding philosophical model. It is the founding, as it were, political model of the most ancient of African kingdoms. We know it as the golden rule, and it was popularized by Yeshua HaMashiach and his emissaries that we now call the first Christians today. But the golden rule of doing unto your neighbor as you would like them to do unto you, loving your neighbor as you would like to be loved, loving the Most High first and best, and loving your neighbor as yourself. That is not a Christian original concept, nor is it a Hindu original concept, Buddhist, Taoist, Confucianist, Jainistic, or Islamic original concept. But what we do find is that Ubuntu is Africa's greatest export to the philosophical world, to the political world, and yes, to the world of spirituality, to the piety world as well. I'll just take a couple samples of them. Reading from Hinduism, it says, everything you should do, you will find in this. Do nothing to others that would hurt you if it were done to you. That is found in Hindu text. Let's go down to, as it were, Confucianism, practiced by so many in China today. Is there any rule that one should follow all of one's life? The answer is yes. The rule of the gentle goodness. What is the gentle goodness? Now, bearing in mind, it is Africans that were the ones to take, as it were, the Ubuntu philosophy into China at the time, into the Indus Valley civilization, which was Hindu Kush at the time, the Sea group people, the people who made the red and black pottery. They are the Africans. They are the Kushites that took it there. What is the gentle goodness? That which we do not wish to be done to us, we do not do it unto others. Of course, even in Islam, it says, none of you shall be true believers of Islam unless you wish for your brother the same that you wish for yourself. So this Ubuntu philosophy, this Ubuntu piety model, this Ubuntu, as it were, a philosophical construct, is Africa's greatest export to the world. And I'm making the point in my presentation on today, as we look at the whole business of reparations, that as a people, we need to look internally and ask ourselves a fundamental question. Yes, we are owed things by England. Yes, we are owed things by France. Yes, we are owed things by Spain and by Portugal and by Germany and other former colonial masters and currently neo-colonial masters. Yes, an external debt is owed, but to what extent do we owe ourselves a certain sense of self-repair, self-healing, and self-deliverance? First question. Second question, and I look forward to the response of my colleagues, is that which pertains to this issue. And it has to do with the question of when we are talking about reparations. If you ask more often than not, a crowd of African people in a room, let's say 100 African people, the end in mind in terms of the goal of reparations are usually extremely different when you consult person X versus person Y. And in many instances, we do not have a uniform. We are not univocal. We are not a monolith in terms of the end in mind that we desire. Now, we know that the CRC has its 10-point reparations plan and it is summarized on the screen. However, by way of the study of our ancient African empires, I have synthesized from Kemet to ancient South Africa, where you have Adam's clock that predates all that we see in Northeast Africa by several millennia. The Adam's clock is dated conservatively at 75,000 years. It could go back as far as 300,000 years. And when I looked at all African civilizations, north, south, east, west, and central, there were 12 major themes that encompass all of them, from spirituality to education to law and justice, environmentalism, community and social justice, of course, economic, security, military, peacekeeping, culture and arts, governance and diplomacy, health and wellness, communications and media, and last but not science and technology. And the question that I am going to be interrogating in the coming weeks is in relation to all of these spheres of what we would call, or disciplines or ministries of a people, of a society, of a civilization. What is the Ubuntu model with respect to each of these? Because there is a Eurocentric model, there's an Asiatic model, there are other models that exist. But what is the original founding African model for each one of these themes, for each one of these topics that I call the 12 keystones of Ubuntu? Time doesn't allow me to tease it out and to do much more where that is concerned. So I'll land there for tonight. But we do look forward to interrogating that question further and asking ourselves, as we look forward to a new day and a new dawn of self-repair, how does our original piety model, political model, and philosophical model factor in? I will turn my first question now to Baba Fergus, because you are, of course, in charge by way of your chairmanship. And again, congratulations of the National Reparations Committee. And as we look at that committee, and as we look at the internal repair that is required of that committee and the work, the very good work that is being done there, do you see the need and the necessity for us, not only in Trinidad and Tobago, but throughout the Caribbean, to have a central idea in mind in terms of what we are rebuilding? What are we restoring? What does that look like? What does the end in mind look like? Because as we are engaging in this post-colonial project of self-healing and reparations, it is a very important question. And tonight I wanted to ask it live on Indaba. So I'll kick it off to you first. And then when you are through, of course, we'll turn to our beloved activist extraordinaire for his comments as well.
Okay, I'll try and be brief because of the limited time that we have. You mentioned that there are a diversity of views on reparations, not only in the Caribbean, but globally. That is expected. Different people have different experiences with colonialism. But in the Caribbean, we define the problem that we are focusing on as crimes against humanity, the most egregious crimes against humanity. So the first thing is, what are we talking about? We're talking about crimes that have been committed against mainly two groups of people we focus on in the Caribbean, the indigenous people and the Africans. So the major crimes against humanity, we're talking about genocide. We're talking about slavery, and the indigenous peoples also underwent enslavement, sometimes called in encomienda system, but they also went through direct chattel slavery as well, because they were raiding different islands, including Trinidad, capturing these native peoples and taking them to other places to enslave them, and many of them died under those circumstances. Some died diving for pearls, some died, in labor on plantations and so on. And many places were wiped out. Sometimes we don't realize that the indigenous peoples also inhabited Barbados, but they were wiped out. By the time the British got there, they had been wiped out already. So complete genocide we are talking about in some of these places. And of course, the slave trade and the slavery recognized as crimes against humanity, all of these by the United Nations. So we are talking about justice. No matter how we see reparations, we are talking about justice, reparatory justice. So that the theme we covered just now in the Africa Report, restitution, is about reparative justice, whatever it is. So no matter how you conceptualize reparation, it boils down to justice, the question of justice, in whatever form it is, whether in terms of financial compensation, as outlined in the 10-point plan, and all of the other details, debt forgiveness and a number of things. But the question of self-repair is also central, and I agree with you, because if we do not, one of the most egregious crimes against humanity committed, that besides the genocide, the slave enslavement, and the slave trade, was in fact the colonization of our mind, the damage that we did, that was done to our mind, which today can be expressed simply as the creation of an inferiority complex that we have internalized. If not for that, we would not have to be dealing with that here issue that Shabaka is talking about, or the skin lightening that he's talking about. How do we deal with those things? How do we deal with them? Religion, as you know, as a man of, how you call this, a man of God, as a reverend of the faith,
Man of the cloth.
a man of the cloth, you would
High
understand
priest of Ubuntu is fine by me.
how Christianity, and I'm not just saying religion, how Christianity was weaponized in the service of white supremacy. And a lot of the damage that was done in the school system. So you have that combination where the churches managed the schools, and where the curriculum that was under the charge of churchmen as governors, managers, teachers, and so on, of the school system, would now be used to create mental, spiritual, and intellectual slaves of us, right? Which a lot of us have remained, because it is said, and I will land with this, right? In the words of our great reggae singer, Bob Marley, right? Bob Marley, a lot of people say, and they don't know what it means. Emancipate yourself from mental slavery. If Bob Marley was not a Rastafarian, he would not have had that consciousness to say that as a Christian, because the central aspect of the colonization and enslavement of the mind is the view of your God as somebody else, the God of the colonizer, the image of the colonizer. So what you have is, in fact, the idolatry of white supremacy that passes to us, as our deity, as our divinity. So we have corrupted our divinity, and therefore we need to deal with it. How? That would be, of course, a conversation for another time, perhaps. But we have to deal with it. And unless we deal with it, we are not talking about self-repair, not for us in this part of the world. So it begins with that, with yourself, with your concept of yourself, your divine being, your divine essence. We have to deal with that. We have to liberate ourselves from the demonology of whiteness, and I'm saying the demonology not of blackness, but the demonology of whiteness, because it is the white devil that we have reconceptualized as our deity. We have to deal with it. I land with that.
Powerful. Over to you, Shabaka.
Well, so many different things that could be engaged in such rich discussion there, but I would like to extend any notion of the idolatry of white supremacy to the public monuments that venerate those who enslaved and who committed genocide, slavery, indentureship, and apartheid. Any public celebration of these characters in the lands we now occupy is a form of idolatry that is one step too far for us, beyond the pale, and certainly should not continue in the 21st century. Totally out of the question. Absurd and insane. I also want us to I want to go back to the earlier aspect of the conversation. Also, raise the question of what do we expect from the Africans on the continent that collaborated with the enslavers? What should be expected from them in their engagement with us? That's also a very important question, because I will tell you personally that I feel discomfort when I engage those groups on the continent that I know if they don't apologize to me personally or make public declarations of apologies for being involved in the enslavement, trying to collaborating with the enslaver. And I want to make this clear. Collaborators don't carry the same
Wait.
responsibility as those who organize and benefit from and cajole and force and create the system in which people are forced to be involved in a process like that. But certainly anyone who collaborates in that process, I feel uncomfortable. And I don't mind saying that publicly. And perhaps, those who are from those groups on the continent, when they come to the Caribbean, they will have note that I feel this discomfort and they may want to engage me, but I need them to understand that anyone who participated in any form or fashion in the enslavement of my ancestors, when I say they shouldn't be celebrated, it's across the board. And so I need to, how do we treat with those who collaborated? What do we expect from them? That's the question. Because
I
it's
think
not,
it's a brilliant question. I think it's a powerful
we know
interrogation.
that as a community, we want to come together. We need to rebuild the bonds that were broken as a collective. But something must be expected from those who collaborated.
Yes, yes. I think it's a fair question. I think it's an honest question. We don't have much time left, but I will attempt to just set the foundation for a continuing discourse. Let me say this on the matter of the monuments. That is low hanging fruit, not only for Trinidad and Tobago, and there is some commitment on the part of the government to deal with that issue. You would know best, and we look forward to your updates in relation to whether or not that is coming along swimmingly, or whether or not it is like molasses pouring out of a very small nib. You will tell us in the Indaba episodes to come. But that is low hanging fruit within our power, within our remit, with under our purview that we can absolutely address.
Reverend Kamal, let me say this. Nothing is low hanging fruit to the colonized man. This is what I have learned, right? If we tonight, since we started off by celebrating the Black Power Revolution, let me tell you, in the revolution, they made a distinction between Africans and Negroes. Negroes being a term of disparagement for those who were thoroughly colonized in such a way that their actions did not seek their own interests. And nothing is beyond the colonized mind. Nothing is beyond them, and there's no low hanging fruit for the colonized mind. We have to accept that, those of us who are involved in struggle here, and prepare ourselves to be very, very patient with the colonized mind. It's something that, you never know when you're going to get a breakthrough with them. You never know when they're going to turn on you in the way that they turned on the students of North, in the way that they turned on Walter Rodney, in the way that they jailed the leaders of 1970, in the way that they marginalized, intellectuals like Gordon Roller and others who were comrades of Rodney at that time in the 70s and so on. You don't know what the next step of the colonized mind is. And this is not just a Trinidadian phenomenon. It's not a Caribbean phenomenon. It is the condition in which people all over the post-colonial world find themselves. And Fanon said that the way that colonialism organized itself when it was preparing to leave, imperialism was preparing to take its formal exit, was to prepare a ruling class to continue to seek its interest. And so, we just don't know how there's not. So I don't want to fill people's hearts and minds with a degree of optimism that may not be sustainable.
We are thankful for it. We are thankful for it. And so again, I'll self-correct, or I'll emphasize what should be, keyword, should be low-hanging fruit are those things within our auspices, power, remit, purview to be able to act upon now. We don't need anything external of us to act upon it. And those monuments, that issue is absolutely one of them that should be, but we definitely stand in solidarity with you. In closing,
let me say one more
sure.
thing here. I'm not a big fan of the idea of the term, the expression, the phrase internal reparations. It doesn't compute to me, because reparations is specific to a crime committed by one group on another, and and it speaks to the restitution in some way.
Let me deal with it. Let me deal with it. I'm thankful for the question.
Let me
We are in overtime, and we are at 1:15. So I'm craving. Hold on. I'm craving. Hold on. Producer, we are craving 5 minutes to settle this issue. I know it's 1:15, and
I
it's
didn't
time
realize
to
I opened a can of worms.
yeah. So it's 1:16 now. So once you start that question, it's going to take us down a road that we're going to need at least 5 minutes or so to be able to address. But I'm glad you addressed it as we are talking about it, because I'll be dealing with a series that speaks to it. Now, within international law, reparations has 5 dimensions when dealing with it as enshrined within the United Nations, with respect to the external, the compensation, the restitution, the guarantees of non-repetition, the satisfaction, and the rehabilitation. However, our thought leaders within the Pan-African movement have long since the 60s and the 70s and onward, and in some cases even before that, have recognized that there are some things as a people that we can do to repair ourselves. For instance, with regards to the Jamaica context, they took Pukumina, which was an African spiritual form that came from the Congo. And this Pukumina that they had, in collaboration with other spiritual forms that came from Asia, that came from Europe, and that came from elsewhere, came together in an amazing potpourri that became what we know as Rastafari today. And so that was a means for them at looking at the colonial project and saying, we reject your version of spirituality and religion, and we are going to take from what is available to us, the materials that is available to us, the things that are available to us, and we are going to construct, we are going to define, we are going to describe things that would allow for us to grow, to rehabilitate, to heal, to restore, to self-deliver. Now, when you look at it from that context, it is saying to self, there are some things that are within my control. And those things that are within my control, I am going to do all that I can within my own remit to self-repair. Now, it does not let off the bag, or as it were, absolve those external from their responsibility.
My brother, I'm not, I don't have a problem with the idea of self-repair. I was just saying that the phrase, the term internal reparations and self-repair don't fit together for me. They're not a clean.
Well, you'll have to take that up with the earlier Pan-Africanists of the 60s and 70s, who I will be quoting as we move along in this series.
Yeah,
but I think it's an interesting dialogue.
The idea of self-repair is fundamental. Of course, you have to take responsibility for your condition, no matter what, at the end of the day. And that applies right across the board. But the question of internal reparations, It's something I had to, you know, tool around with in my head. you
Think
know.
about it some more. We have a few series to unpack it. You may not be the only one. So perhaps you voice something that someone else is also thinking, but I promise you we will be dealing with it. Well, folks, we are certainly not out of a love. We're not out of words. We are not out of interest. We are not out of dialogue. But for tonight, we are certainly out of time. I want to thank our Facebook listeners and supporters. I want to thank our YouTube listeners and supporters. I want to ask that you like this broadcast. I want to ask that you comment and say where you are with regards to this process. Where do you land with regards to this process? And of course, be sure to share it with your families and
And
with your friends as well.
before you close off completely, just pull before you pull the switch. Could you just recognize some of the people in the chat? I think you
Oh,
have some
sure,
important people.
absolutely. I would like to recognize the mayor of Bahamas, Ras Jamiki, out of the Bahamas. I would like to recognize as well Ambassador Emmanuel Sikanati out of Ghana. Enough respect to you. I'd like to recognize as well Sister Irene tuning in on tonight. Your location is not known to me, but hopefully we would learn it over time. Dan Mann, Kelvin out of Jamaica. Of course, we have other persons as well, Mr. Ninju, among others who have joined us on tonight. So not only do we have diasporan listeners and fan base, but we also have those that are continental as well. I want to recognize the royal societies that have joined us on tonight and to deal with the question of how do we repair the issue between the African continental indigenous native peoples and that of the diaspora. That is absolutely a juggernaut of a question that my activist brother raised. But we do have a series. We are going to unpack it. Again, not out of love, fate, or words, but tonight we are out of time. Saying very pleasant good night here in Trinidad and Tobago and asking you please tune in next week, Wednesday, the 28th of February, for another edition of Indaba, the place where knowledge grows, the place to find, of course, consensus, the voice of the people, and the voice of the Emancipation Support Committee. With that said, over and out, royal salute.
Take care.